And he also, in other articles, he talked about when he got interviewed by the FBI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Stan Schmidt explained in the article in the 1000th issue that one of the reasons that science fiction seems to have high predictability is because we basically fire a shotgun at the future.
Yeah.
And something's bound to hit somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And you tend to forget about
surprising
all the
how
misses.
much did go. Not just the shotgun effect. They got pretty good.
But it's also that there are so many scientists writing for the magazine, and so many of the writers who are trying to keep up with the science just to predict that, because they want that verisimilitude, which is when I walked in the door, Stan explained to me his definition of a science fiction story, which both words are equally important. Science has to be really good, and the fiction has to be really good.
Works for me.
Yeah.
I wrote a story called Hurricane, and I did a lot of research on storm formation, hurricane formation, realized that the model of the walls of the hurricane and the toroids and all, which was the strong side, which was the weak side, 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock, on this and all. And I had a story which basically was a guy jumping off a boat with a parasail and ascending through the hurricane, akin to mountain climbing, getting to the top and then descending through the center. It could be rescued again. And I spent a lot of time. I built a freaking model out of cardboard and cotton. This hurricane with cotton and all, and showing us, and I had string going through. We can't go there because that's a low pressure area, and he would fall. So you got to go to the high pressure. And I had this string going through this thing, this entire thing, and I said, I had it down, and I kept working to make sure I was being accurate on this thing. And the way the guy met the other person who was in this is they were kayaking on the New River in West Virginia. And I thought, I'm going to catch hell from the meteorologist on this. I'm going to catch hell on this because there's very little facts about what the inside of a hurricane looks like. There's a lot of guesses. So I'm going to catch hell from the animal groups. This sort of published. I got one letter of complaint. The guy says, you can't kayak down that chute there on the New River. I wrote back to him and says, I did it.
Now you have to ask yourself, how many rational authors would go to the trouble of building an actual model of a hurricane in order to write a story that, if they're lucky, going to pay them 6 cents a word?
Well, there was a thing called what's the name of it?
Are you thinking of what I'm thinking of?
Yeah.
Second Life?
Second Life. I don't know if everybody know what Second Life is. Second Life is a virtual universe where you inhabit a character, you have an avatar, and the camera is sitting right back here for the most part. And you can move your avatar around with your keyboard and all. And you can dress them and change the physical characteristics of the individual and all. Make it. So you run into these other people. Some of them look like people, some of them look like God knows what, and all. And you can buy cars and planes and whatnot. It's a very nice simulation, but they have a construction area where you can go and you can build things. You can say, I want a cube, and you can size the cube the way you want. And you can mold the cube, push in here, push in there, push in there. You can build a droid, you can build this. So I needed, I had a story in which I had a spaceship, starship, that was built on the outside of a sphere, and at the focus of the sphere was a virtual black hole, which is a propulsion system. Well, it was close enough that it had a gravitational effect on the ship. So where you were standing on the surface of the sphere, you were always normal to the black hole. And I couldn't visualize what the corridors would look like and what the view from this point to that point in the ship would be. So I went into Second Life and I built this thing in Second Life and just played around with it, looked at the sight lines and looked at the configuration, and I was able to then go out there and write the story so that it had at least some semblance of reality. If you can call it reality.
And it took 2 hours to write the story, 20 hours to build the story.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. It was a couple days to build that damn show.
I was going to say there are also, there's the hard science side, and then there's, even in the late 30s, like somebody like Doc Smith was still writing the I'm going to hurl planets around, and those kinds of stories, and you could kind of see that evolution too, where Campbell kind of came in and still liked what Smith was writing, so he continued to publish those stories. But then you'd see the Heinleins and the Asimovs and A.E. Van Vogt and Malcolm Jameson and Catherine Moore, and later on, what was her husband's name? He wrote Kuttner, yeah, he wrote some great stories. Much more of the science and engineering, and much less of that other. There's definitely a divergence there. They wrote together under a
pseudonym.
Yeah, but I can't think of what it was. But they did write together under a pseudonym, and they actually wrote under two, both of which were really popular for a while.
Well, I was surprised when I learned that the Dragon Riders of Rubin appeared in analog.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that originated. That was in like '68, I think.
Yeah.
Well, the competition for to get a story in analog is kind of tough. You want to talk about the slush bomb?
Well, when I was there, things may have changed. When I was there, we got about 800 submissions a month for 6 to 10 slots in the magazine. And Stan read everything by himself. Asimovs, we shared the duties. Gardner, the editor, read, and Sheila read, and I read stuff. But for analog, Stan insisted he read everything. And frequently, he'd have to send out form rejection letters because there are 800 stories. He's rejecting 790 of them. He can't write that many personal letters in 30 days and publish a magazine. So there's a form rejection letter. And frequently, we would get nasty letters back from authors who apparently never want to be published, because the way to get published is, of course, to write a nasty letter back to the editor after they said, no, I don't want to buy your story, because that's going to predispose them to buying your next. So many of them saying, how dare you send me this form rejection letter? John Campbell, they would say the founder of the magazine, even though he was the third editor, because obviously they don't, would never send a form rejection to people. He helped authors, and I've heard this from everyone. And Stan would always have to write back. Actually, I think by the end we'd come up with a form letter for this one as well, saying, dear author, John Campbell actually wrote that form rejection letter that we sent you. It's using the same form rejection letter.
Stan would send his rejection letters, and they wrote on a piece of paper about this big, and this long, had the masthead on it. And
Stan loved those things.
Yeah, and I had this picture in my mind that he had his typewriter sitting there. He had like a toilet paper roll about this through there, and he would just type one off, rip it off, hand it to Ian.
Well, no, they were NCR paper. They weren't actually on a roll. They were individual pieces, but they were triple copies, because we were using typewriters in these days. And so it was 3 pieces, and he would type it off, and it was my job to pull out the middle and keep the copy of the letter and send the author the top and the bottom copy. And so many authors got confused and would send back the bottom copy, even though it said absolutely nothing. We would send the 2 copies because in the case when Stan wanted to say a great deal or wanted to give suggestions and talk about the story, he would expect the author to send back the copy with the story after making the changes, so Stan would know what it was, so he wouldn't have to go to his files and dig out that middle piece. Yeah, he loved those damn things. Even after we got computers in, Stan kept his Electric 3 because that's how he could use those. I think there were 5x8 NCR.
Yeah. He told me once that he told me he did read everything, and he read really, really fast. And the way he knew a story was going to work was if he had to slow down.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
If he had to slow down to read the story, you were doing something right, and he was going to take a closer look at it. But generally, it was sort of like really fast.
So many authors would try some stupid trick like putting a post-it note on page 30 of their 40-page story, or turning a page upside down, and would be so irate when they would get the manuscript back and those things hadn't been moved, because you can tell after you've read 800 stories a month for the last 30 years, you can usually tell by the end of the first or second page if the story isn't going anywhere or it's not grabbing you, and you don't have to read all the way through it. But sometimes you flip through those stories anyway, and you put a post-it note on the page that's upside down saying this page inserted upside down just to tick off that author. Leaving it upside down, of course. Did you have a question or comment?
You kind of touched on it a little. I was going to ask the stereotypical question, how do we get where you're sitting right now? But, right.
Well, you don't do it my way, because this is a really weird way to do it. Get a job at the magazine, and then sell a story to the magazine 3 years later, and then have your first letter published in the magazine the year I left or the year after I left. I apparently did it all backwards. But it's, well, as I tell my authors now, and I told them when I published my own magazine, that's what short fiction is for, because it's really hard to convince a publisher to publish a book by an unknown author. But a magazine, we're publishing 10 stories in this issue, so if 1 or 2 are by unknowns, the reader's going to take a chance on them because they're buying the magazine. That's why it's so much easier to break in with short fiction. And as authors become known for their shorter fiction, they turn to writing longer stuff and they stop writing for the magazine, so the magazine always needs new authors. Either that or you take 30 years off and then you come back to the magazine and the editorial assistant's an idiot and thinks you're a brand new author. And gives your name wrong on the table of contents.
13.